Good evening. I am Selwyn Collins, your host of CWS Conversations with Selwyn. Thank you for joining us. We are back with Nigel Hughes. Nigel, I'm sorry about these quick breaks, but there's so much to cover and so little time. So the question from the chat room, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Right.
Yes.
The question from the chat room is that if your intent is not to seek presidential status, I think this is what the guest, the person wants to ask. What then is your political agenda?
My political agenda has nothing to do with me seeking presidential status at all. My political agenda is how do we effect change. The one reason that I'm in politics is to effect constitutional change as a first step to a better, more inclusive form of governance. I think part of the problem that we have had since independence and before is that dependent on who is in office, there's always a feeling of exclusion by a significant part of the population. And a lot of that has to do with our present constitutional architecture, because literally under the 1980 Constitution, which was amended in 2001, but they didn't address this issue, you don't even have to get a majority of the votes. You just have to get a plurality of the votes, and you get absolute, total, and exclusive executive power. Now that means, whether it's factual or not, that means that if you're not in the party that has won the elections, and unfortunately the history of Guyana is a history of race and ethnic politics, then you're excluded. Now, even if you, with the best will in the world, want to do... So it looks as if we're back up.
It came back up?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Awesome. Let's continue. Let me see. So I think you would answer the question about your political aspiration or agenda. But let's take the question about Castro, about Cuba. The Obama administration, or Obama's decided to have an embassy, or build an embassy in Cuba. What do you think that means for the region?
Well, let me put it this way. I've actually visited Cuba, and the human development in Cuba is absolutely phenomenal. Even at the just to give you an example of that, the tour guide that we had in Cuba, who was taking us around, had 3 degrees, was a former Air Force pilot, and that was not exceptional. As you know, Cuba has the best health facilities, certainly in the Caribbean.
Yes.
It holds in the Caribbean.
Yes.
It holds some. It holds some of the patents for, certainly in terms of tropical medicine, some of the most innovative and revolutionary medical products. And I believe for the Caribbean, when Cuba is quote unquote allowed to come on the open market, I don't think that the Caribbean product, by that I mean the English-speaking Caribbean product, is going to compete very well. Because Cuba has a lot of things going for it. It's got history. Cuba has some of the, if not the oldest road in the New World, quote-unquote New World. Roads that were built in 1515, thereabouts. So there's still, so purely from a historical point of view, Cuba is ahead of the rest of the Caribbean too. In terms of their tourism product, when you go to Cuba, everybody else has airlines, they have hotels, the Canadians are arriving there by the thousands, the Europeans are arriving by the thousands. So Cuba really is in a perfect position to fly economically, but for the embargo and the pressure that was brought to bear on by the United States of America. In reality, what that means for the rest of the Caribbean, particularly smaller islands in the Eastern Caribbean, it means that their product, which is struggling at the moment with an embargo on Cuba, is going to go through even further crisis because they're not going to be, they don't have the ability to really effectively compete with Cuba. Cuba, just in terms of the number of rooms, the quality of service, size of the economy, everything going, cigars, but it's history cigars. One of the best operas I've seen in the opera house in Havana, in old Havana. The Cuban National Ballet Company, for example, spends 9 of the 12 months in the year performing at the best opera houses and concert halls in Europe. That's just the level of talent that exists, and because they have not, they have just been forced to exist despite this ridiculous embargo that's been there forever. Their human development has been phenomenal. So when you put that in the open market, just in terms of talent, the rest of the Caribbean, we're going to be in difficult. Certainly, the tourist economies in the Caribbean are going to be in difficult circumstances in terms of being able to compete. President Obama opening an embassy in Cuba, I think, is a very progressive step by the American administration. I think it was inevitable. It had to come. Cuba is you can't isolate Cuba. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of pressure on him from the Cubans who left in the 50s and their children. But I think that sort of reaction that their parents felt, or that generation of Cubans felt, has been diluted somewhat. There's no possibility of them going back to Cuba to claim their old properties or what have you. But I think it's a very, very progressive step. Cuba has been absolutely phenomenal in the fight against the apartheid regime in South Africa. Matter of fact, it is the very famous battle that took place in, I think it was either in Namibia, where they actually defeated, the Cuban army actually defeated the South African Defense Force that actually turned the tide in favor of the removal of apartheid. I mean, Cuba has just been phenomenal in terms of the commitment to the struggles of people, who are looking for just literally self-proclamation. So, and Castro needs to be applauded for that. Of course, there are other issues that are problematic, but I certainly wouldn't want not to salute his contribution.
You're talking about Cuban doctors and so on, Nigel. I would be remiss if I have this conversation with you without mentioning that scare in March 9, 2013, when you suffered that cardiac event.
Yeah.
What did you learn about yourself? I mean, a lot of people came close to you, rallied around you, and I mean, all of us prayed and hoped for the best and so on. But what did that teach? What did you learn about yourself and the people close to you during those trying times?
Well, Salman, I think this is the first time I'm in your program. I really want to say thank you, first of all, to literally the several hundreds of people that offered prayers. It was the most humbling experience that I had. People I didn't. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. People that I didn't know knew me. People that I didn't know at all offered prayers, and there's nothing that I can ever do in my life to adequately express my true gratitude to all the people that said prayers. It really was a phenomenal and very, very humbling experience. In terms of the lesson, in terms of having a cardiac event at the top of a mountain in the Maroni Mountains, really, when you have an event like that, you realize, first of all, how fragile you are. I mean, despite what you may want to tell yourself, your existence is extremely fragile. Two, it does bring into very clear focus the things that really matter in your life. You know, the people that are close to you, the people that rely on you, that you don't realize rely on you. Just the things that are important to life, and you do have to take stock of what it is that you were doing that you thought was important, but really at the end of the day, doesn't really matter. And you come away from that experience, and certainly I came away from that experience a different person. I certainly, the colors were a lot brighter when I got out of hospital. The wind was a lot more gentle. The sun was a lot warmer, a lot more significant in my life. Spent a lot of hours sitting out in the moonlight with my wife, saying, "Hey, I'm really happy to be here." And those things that you really cherish count. It brings. I really can't adequately describe to you how it brings things into focus.
Nigel, you're out there in the trenches. I know you're passionate and committed. Then there's the media, there's the press, and there are the accusations, and the name callings, and all these things. How do these things affect you and your family, and how do you cope with that?
Hello.
All right, there you are.
Okay.
Did you hear the question before the break?
It kind of dropped. You just started to say that the name calling, the press.
Right, the name calling, the accusations, and all these things in the press. How did this affect your family? How did it affect you personally? And how do you cope with that?
Let me start with my family. My family thinks that I'm crazy, with the exception of my wife. Absolutely nuts to be involved in politics in Guyana. I think my father, if he said anything to me or could say anything to me now, he would be saying, "You must be crazy. You think you can change Guyana? It's set in its ways." Clearly, every time there's some attack in the press, it naturally affects them. Initially, when you get into politics, it's a hard wake-up call. You know that it's going to get nasty, but really, Guyana is special kind of nasty. It's in Guyana, I think politics exists for people to be nasty. Really, I mean that's the impression one gets when you look at what's going on. I mean, take for example, you can't have a rational discussion in Guyana, whether it's in the press, whether it's at a conference or a convention or a workshop, without people getting personal and very how do I put it? Very nasty, really, in their attacks. I mean, and it's not just me. I have seen really good people with good ideas attacked so viciously, not for what they're articulating, but simply because they are who they are. And I don't really think that we are going to get anywhere in Guyana if the conversation starts with the vitriol with which it starts. I mean, you just have to pick up any national newspaper in Guyana any given day, and you realize that we're far gone.
What are your deepest concerns, deepest fears for Guyana these days?
Let me put it decently, because my deepest fears for Guyana, if I really share them in a public interview with you,
I hear that.
I believe that, well, my concern for Guyana is that the number of people who see no hope is increasing at such an alarming rate that there will come a time very shortly, if it's not beginning now, where we are going to go to that stage where they think it is okay for them to do whatever they have to do to survive. And when you reach that stage, reaching those people at a level where you want to begin to create hope is going to be virtually impossible. And when you create And I'm not talking at an individual level. When you create communities that have zero hope, that feel that any prospects of real development, any prospects of them improving their life circumstances through established channels don't exist, and those opportunities are not available to them, you create a special underclass of people who have no interest and no vested interest in the society. And you're in a dangerous place, because Guyana is a very, very small society, socially very very fragile, and it's a horrendously divided community. I mean, the cleavages here are almost at the stage where they're irreparable. And if you add on top of that permanent hopelessness, you're in real dangerous territory.
If you were in a position to positively affect the lives of women in Guyana, what are 3 things you would do immediately?
Without wanting to sound patronizing, I certainly believe that the women bring a totally different perspective to governance and government. They don't suffer from the disability of testosterone. And really, I think, it's time we have a group. I don't want to say an individual, a group of women in positions of real power in terms of charting. The future of the country. So it's not patronizing. I would have a female president. I certainly think that in terms of real power, there's a real need for them to become the major decision makers at all levels. It's not a case of putting a single individual. I think that has to be across the entire society, and that includes industry. It includes health services. It includes the profession. Certainly in the profession, I think they are in the majority, but certainly in terms of decision-making positions, I would certainly attempt to give them real decision-making and authority and power.
Nigel,
3, but certainly that's what I think should happen.
You are in a sort of unique position. Your wife is in the political arena. She's a member of parliament, and you are in the political arena. You have a demanding legal practice.
I'm not a member of parliament, though. Thank God.
Well, okay, all right. No one knows what tomorrow brings, but.
I'm not going into parliament under this present construct. I mean, I was not a candidate for that reason in the last election.
Okay.
Anyway, it's another discussion.
With all that's going on, Nigel, how do you balance all of that with family, friends, and leisure? Do you have much time for leisure?
The short answer to that, Selwyn, is you don't balance it. You never. I mean. Sometimes I look at myself and I think I'm nuts to be doing the things I'm doing.
But what drives you though, Nigel?
Something's got to give. Something's got to give. And certainly, since I got involved in politics, a lot of the at the social level, a lot of the things that I used to do, and that I enjoyed doing, the jazz festivals and what have you, I don't. At a very personal and an economic level, you suffer, because once you are not with the government, or you're perceived to be hostile to the government, your clients are told then this is don't use the firm, don't use the the history.
Yeah, I understand.
What happens is that clients who want to come to you and clients who are with you, especially in sensitive industries like gold or what have you, literally say to you, look, we're sorry, but we're getting the pressure from the government not to be associated with your firm and what have you, and that's just the way it is. I mean, it happens in this regime, and it happened in the regime before. So, yeah, that's a fact.
Yet you keep plodding on, Nigel. Why?
Why I keep plodding on?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, the alternative is what? Death. You got to keep plodding on. I mean, you don't give up. Listen, let me every time I get concerned or worried, I don't want to say depressed, but get concerned or worried about, all the challenges that you face because of the positions you have adopted, I just go back to any of my four parents, any one of them who was in the field cutting cane, and I think, well, if they survive those odds,
Right.
who am I sitting down in this luxury to even begin to afford myself the luxury of being depressed about my present circumstances? I mean, I can't think of anything that would have been more hopeless either than being at the bottom of the ship in the Middle Passage or being in a plantation with a man with a whip above you from a different background. And if they can make it through that, who am I? I'm a mere mortal compared to their great spirit. So and in terms of the historic march, because we're just here for whatever it is, the 89 years that we're here. We are a very minuscule part of the progression of mankind, and I really would be. It would be a sign of great ingratitude for me to think that my circumstances are anywhere close to comparable with them, and if they survive that, that keeps me going.
Nigel, I have had the distinct privilege and honor of meeting both of your parents, and I mean, being very close to both of them. Both very brilliant, very astute minds. What have you learned from them? What words of wisdom have you learned from each of them that still resonate with you today?
That's easy, man. I mean, I suppose everybody says this, but I do have. And I have had, my dad's no longer here. I have had phenomenal parents, phenomenal. And, so when, I say this to anybody, if you still have your parents with you on every occasion that you are afforded an opportunity, you need to let them know how absolutely awesome there was. And before my dad died, I flew back into the country literally the night before he died. I knew he was doing well, and I drove from the airport straight to him, and I saw him. It must have been about 12:15, and I actually, for the 100th millionth time, was able to say to him, "Hey, you have been phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal."
Mm-hmm.
And not only do I love you for it, I just thank God for having you share this space with me, and more than that, actually having brought me here. And so the next day when it was about 10:30 that he had gone, of course it breaks you up, but I would have been totally devastated if I couldn't tell him that one last time.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I see my mom, you got me tearing up here, Selvin.
Sorry, man.
I really gotta tell her. That, you're phenomenal. I mean, and my mom lived for her kids. You can't ask for greater blessings than that. Really, I mean, in terms of life experiences, it's everything. I mean, I can pick 100 examples at any given time of where, particularly, my mom made decisions about my education that have put me in a totally different trajectory than the one I was on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The easiest one for me to recall is when I was in second form in Saint. I'd actually got into Saint when I was very young. I got into Saint, I think it was the 9.5 at the time. You really weren't supposed to be in school until 10.5, secondary school. And because of that, well, I say because of it, I wasn't doing as well as she thought I could be doing when I was in second form. And in those days, you wore short pants up to second form, and by the time you got into third form, you were into long trousers and stuff. And that was a big thing, because the school had just gone co-ed.